Hello and welcome everyone to People First, 4 Trends Driving Digital Transformation Success. Today's webinar is presented by Badgeville and Clicktools, both brought to you by Calidus Cloud, as well as Futurum Research. And on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank you for joining. I'm Samantha. I'm your host today with the marketing department at Calidus Cloud. And before we jump into the presentation and discussion with Daniel Newman, please allow me to very quickly introduce myself and our group at Calidus. Now, looking at the slide here, time certainly flies, as I have been with Clicktools. I've been with the Clicktools marketing team since way back in 2012 and have been serving B2B tech companies for the past 16 years. For those of you not familiar with Calidus Cloud, we are the leading provider of cloud-based sales, marketing, learning, and customer experience solutions. And our customers and colleagues on today's webinar certainly know very well that Calidus acquired Clicktools back in 2014, and then more recently Badgeville just in June of this year. And why that matters and what that means to the marketplace is that we now offer best-of-breed customer experience solutions that combine Badgeville gamification technology with the Clicktools enterprise feedback platform. And that's actually really, really good news for service and support departments, as well as sales, marketing, training, HR, and really any other business functions that are focused on deepening customer and employee engagement and experience, which we're going to talk about quite a bit today. And we're certainly happy to talk to anyone on today's call about how we might help you improve CX at your organization, but we will save the minutia there and the details on that for another day, because we're all here to hear from Daniel Newman, who is a leading expert on digital transformation, marketing, CX, gamification, and a whole lot of other interesting technology-related subjects. So by way of introduction, let me just introduce Dan. So our featured speaker today is Daniel Newman, who is CEO at Broadsuite Media Group and principal analyst for Futurum Research. And I'm pretty sure Dan is going to further introduce himself and maybe even talk about being a giant soccer fan. We did want to get everybody engaged today by launching a poll question about digital transformation. Does your organization currently have a digital transformation initiative in place? And don't feel bad to that if the answer is no, because we're going to talk about it a lot today. And it may be something that you don't even know you're doing, and you may just use a different term to describe that. And with that, Dan, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to you, and we will speak again here shortly.
Well, thank you very much for the warm welcome, Samantha. I do very much appreciate the opportunity to spend a little time with all of you in this wonderful format that we still know as the digitally transformed webinar. So I see the poll answers coming in, and somewhere around about 63% of you, and that's with a vast majority of the people who are attending voting have said yes, they do have a digital transformation initiative in place. Somewhere around 60-40. Now, a broader study that was recently done by Vance Bourne came back and it found that only about 22% of all organizations of the 4,000 that they polled were truly in a digital transformation or could acknowledge that they had a strategy in place. So while you start to see content out there talking about a post-digital era and that we've reached a time where digital transformation is no longer going to be a core subject, this kind of research and this kind of data that shows such a small fraction of companies having a true digital transformation strategy in place really, to me, proves that we still have a long way to go. So the year is 2009, and there is a little company that we all know called Blockbuster Video. And at the time, CEO Jim Keyes was asked a question. And the question that came into CEO Jim Keyes was, are you worried about a little company called Netflix? Now in 2009, Netflix had proposed to Blockbuster Video, the world's largest and most well-known movie rental company, the opportunity to buy Netflix. And at the time, the purchase price was a mere $50 million. Now, yes, I know $50 million may feel like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, and with Netflix now having a valuation of well over $10 billion, you'd say, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Well, Jim Keyes at the time's response to the question about his concern about Blockbuster was, or his concern about Netflix was, you know, I'm not really concerned about them. You know, yeah, they have a nice, you know, format, a nice user experience online for renting and selecting videos, but overall, we're pretty comfortable with where we stand as the biggest, fittest, strongest organization in our space. Alas, the year is now 2012, and as Blockbuster was closing down their final 300 stores after they had announced their bankruptcy, you only can look back and say, I wonder if Jim Keyes and Blockbuster would be someplace else if in 2009 they had answered that question differently. What had happened to Blockbuster Video was they had been disrupted. But what had really happened was the needs of the customer had changed. And that's really what digital transformation is all about. It's about a new type of customer, and it's about understanding that customers have a new set of needs. So when we wrote the book, and Samantha so kindly introduced me having written 5, but my latest book is called Building Dragons, and it's about digital transformation in the experience economy. And when we wrote the book, we basically defined that there are 7 laws of digital transformation. And for many people, digital transformation, they think about technology. And even when we set out to write the book, the first thing that came to our mind was we wanted to write a book about big data, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, 3D and virtualization, augmented reality, and sure, all those topics came up. But as we did our research for the book, what we found was companies really need to transform for 2 reasons. One is to create customer experiences that meet modern customer expectation, and 2 is to create the type of workplace that people want to work, want to participate, be productive, and help companies to achieve those customer experiences. So just to give you guys a quick introduction of those 7 laws, they basically came down to this. The first law was that the entire customer experience must be at the heart of your digital transformation. The second is when we talk about customer experience, we're talking about the buyer's journey. And every buyer's journey starts with the discovery and then the first interaction, the first time somebody engages your company. The third law is that you have to constantly remember that your buyer's journey includes customer feedback, customer reviews, and customer ratings. You do not define your customer experience, your customers do. The fourth is knowing that all touch points must be remarkable and impactful. And this is something we'll talk more throughout the rest of this presentation. The fifth law is that all customer experiences need to be as simple, intuitive, frictionless, and personal as possible. Yes, that sounds very hard. How do you make it really personal and really simple? But that is the challenge in your digital transformation. The sixth law is that all customer touch points need to be integrated across all the platforms where your customers spend time. You probably hear a little bit about omnichannel. Well, I like to say in digital transformation, it starts with right channel and then moves to omnichannel. And then the seventh and final law is that all customer experiences must drive future interactions and inspire loyalty. Some of you may have heard the word community come out, but the most powerful brands in the world today have the strongest communities around them. Now, with all this in mind about the laws of digital transformation, there's a second piece of digital transformation that's so important, and that's meeting the business objectives of your company. We transform to create memorable customer experiences, to get our employees more engaged, and ultimately to meet the company's objectives. So let's talk about what some of those are. It might be meeting your revenue and growth projections. It may be to become more profitable and improve bottom line and the return to your shareholders. And then obviously those goals I spoke of, it comes down to how do we improve the ratings that our customers are giving us? And then finally, keeping employees on board. We all have heard the costs of replacing employees, and they're monumental in comparison to keeping them. And the same is true with customer attrition, keeping our customers and employees. It's very expensive to replace them. It's a much, much better investment to keep them. And these really are core reasons to transform. But the transformed company, we like to say, has 5 traits that every company can achieve. And this is important too, because oftentimes we get caught up talking about the big unicorns, the Ubers and the Teslas and the Googles and the Facebooks, but every company has the chance to become a transformed organization, and that's really what we meant when we said the dragon. The dragon is the company that reinvents itself, and they do that by becoming more agile, more adaptable, by getting faster, more creative, and defining and understanding what market leadership means to them. And touching on a couple of these points a little bit further, when I talk about agility and adaptability, the old model of success and change management was the Darwinistic, the fittest survive. If you guys remember the story I told just a few minutes ago about the Blockbuster and Netflix debacle, Netflix was a tiny company in comparison to Blockbuster, but they were the most agile and the most adaptable. They built cultures and organizations that were predicting what customers want, delivering them those things that they wanted, and then building their entire vision around that. While the bigger, stronger, fitter Blockbuster was following. They were slow to come to the market. They thought that their position as market leader allowed them to basically delay their transformation, to make changes late, and ultimately what it did was cost them their business. For many organizations, though, one of the challenges is figuring out where to start. Where do you start your digital transformation? And for this, I like to tell companies, and I get the opportunity to work with some of the biggest organizations in the world, and it really comes down to asking business questions. So when you think about digital transformation, you think about the words, I said earlier, we often think about tech, but really digital is technology, but transformation is people. And digital transformation in its most simplistic form is change management in a time of rapid technological change. So when you were going through change management throughout your career, whether you're new or whether you've been in business for 20, 30 years and beyond, you realize that change really came down to understanding what you were trying to accomplish, asking the right questions. So this is where I tell a lot of companies, start by asking the questions of what you're trying to accomplish, and then let's back into the ways we can leverage the technology, the tools, the solutions, and most importantly, the resources and people of an organization to successfully accomplish that transformation. So you'll see some of the questions I asked here. How can digital technologies help us improve our customer service? So you may think, what about something as simple as using Twitter to respond to customers in a timely fashion? We've all heard about customers wanting more rapid response times. Well, even back to a few years ago, and I'm not sure if you knew this, but most customers were looking for responses in the same day. It was about 67%. And of that group, over 32% wanted a response to any inquiry that they sent online in just 30 minutes, which meant companies needed to find new vehicles beyond email and phone to respond to people to make sure that they were answering the questions that people had in the channels they preferred in a timely manner. And you'll see here some of the other questions. It could be about attracting new customers. It may be about reducing customer attrition. And of course, it can be looking at how do you shorten your cycle of getting new products and services to market. So with this in mind, I want to introduce to you guys the 4 trends that I really like to focus on for companies looking to successfully digitally transform. And the first trend that I like to talk about is the culture trend. And basically, it's that successful digital transformation starts and ends by creating a culture that can be rapidly adaptable to change. So many companies think they can throw technology at people problems, and that just doesn't turn out to be true. In most cases, companies that try to force new technologies on their employees or force new systems on their customers end up getting rejected. And really what it comes down to is that people need to feel involved in the change. Companies right now that are having the most success with the adoption of new technologies are the companies that are getting their people involved in the process. They're getting them involved in beta. They're allowing them to participate in introducing new products. They're creating a passion, and they're clearly telling their people what the digital transformation means to their business. And that is so often the problem is, as management, we like to push our initiatives on our employees. But this isn't just a digital transformation thing. This is really a leadership thing. But throughout our research, when we were writing the book, we found over and over again that when it came down to driving change in the organization, it started with people, and people, by and large, are afraid of technology. And in fact, The Atlantic did an article not too long ago that basically showed people's greatest fears, and technological change and the use of private data actually rated higher on their list of things that people feared than death itself. Now, that may sound a little bit crazy, but with so much of our information being out there and so much of what we do and we know and we think being shared through our social networks and through search, people are more afraid than ever. But that fear can resonate throughout the organization and limit creativity and limit people's willingness to participate in change. So with each of my little trends, I like to share an interesting stat. So with this culture trend, I thought it was important that people realize that according to CIO Magazine, almost 61% of projects, tech projects and transformation projects within organizations are failing. And the top reason it's being cited right now for this is that company culture is resisting adoption. And I'm sure everyone on this call, everybody on this webinar can think of a time that they were pushed a new technology that they were told to use and were told would fix all their problems, but the tech was not adopted or not successful. This isn't just you and your company, this is happening everywhere, and I think it's a very important trend that everybody pays attention to. The second trend is something I kind of alluded to in the introduction of this presentation when I talked about the 7 laws of digital transformation. But really, we are in a new world with a new customer. Dan Pink wrote a book called Drive, and in his book he talked about this concept of customer parity. In the last 5 years, due to the information being made available on the internet, we essentially as consumers usually have as much, if not more, information than those who are selling to us, even about the products that we are buying. Now, this defines the new customer. The new customer is this informed customer. Some of you may have heard the statistics come out about how anywhere from 50 to 80% of a buyer's journey is complete before they'll even pick up the phone and talk to a salesperson. Now, depending on the source that you choose, the statistic can be different, but what has been proven is that people are finding new methods to become educated on the products and services that they buy. So what this means is that we are essentially dealing with a new kind of customer. And this new customer is why we digitally transform. So we have to think of things like where our customers are spending time. So recently, one of the data points that came out right around our Thanksgiving holiday and Black Friday, Cyber Monday, was that a massive amount of shopping had moved from computer-based on Cyber Monday to mobile-based. So now instead of us seeing people just going online in their homes and at their desktop, we're actually seeing a new model of hybrid shopping. This new customer experience is where people go into a store and they are looking to possibly buy something from retail, but they're searching online simultaneously to get reviews and ratings of products, but also to see if there's better pricing, different availability, what different options are out there. Where else could they purchase the product potentially for a better price or get a better warranty? This is a new customer being defined. Some other trends that are going on, and many of you have seen this, is customers seeking feedback in real time from their communities. Social shopping. This new customer experience is being defined by people going online on their Facebook or LinkedIn pages, depending on B2B versus a B2C purchase, and asking their community publicly what they may think about a product or a service. Is it something they should consume or something they shouldn't consume? Well, this new customer experience defines your transformation. How are you making the information that your customers have needs to find out available to them? How are you answering their questions in digital formats? And how are you migrating with their use cases? If they're spending more time on mobile, are you creating a mobile environment that's easy for them to get the answers to their questions? And then, of course, are you creating a social environment where they can engage with your brand quickly and get human answers, or answers that feel like human if you're deploying like a chatbot, that make them feel like they're important, which really comes down to what builds that powerful community, that brand, that love of a brand that some people and that some companies have accomplished but so few are able to achieve. So for this one of the interesting stats that I wanted to point out was a rule that the Business Networking Association came out with. And what they had found is that about 80% of companies believe that they've created a truly differentiated customer experience. However, when asked, their customers have given the feedback that only about 8% of them feel like their providers are truly creating this differentiated experience. And this is really an important statistic because it basically means we have about 10 times more confidence that we're creating a unique, memorable, personal customer experience than what our customers see. So this means customer experience is always something we can work on, and of course that starts by getting the feedback of our customers, asking them what we're doing well and what we're not, because ultimately what we have to have in mind is what is their buyer's journey look like and how are we making it easier for them to be a customer, to stay a customer, and of course share with their friends. The third trend that's taking place is the employee engagement trend. Now this trend is very, very interesting because, as I mentioned, the culture mandate, well, the engaged employee is basically the underpinning of the culture mandate. Most companies out there today are still finding that they have a large percentage of their employees not engaged at work. Now if we digitally transform to create better customer experiences and to engage our employees more closely, then we have to be thinking about how are we accomplishing this. Now there are many ways to do it, but it starts of course with having methods for getting feedback and getting your employees involved in the process. How are we asking our employees for how they feel from their customer engagements? Are they clear and understanding of the vision of the company's transformation? What type of tactics can we provide to them to get them more involved? And later in this conversation, when Sam and I get into some Q&A, we'll talk a little bit about things like employee gamification and how companies around the web are using this technique to basically get their employees more engaged and competing and participating in more activities on a day-to-day with getting instant feedback. So this is really important. But also, employees become your advocates of your brand. Employees, you might have heard a trend called employee advocacy, but this is the utilization of social for companies to tell their stories and to more publicly build that community that we talked about. Digitally transformed companies have employees that are actively participating and sharing brand stories on platforms like Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and they're comfortable sharing their stories because they believe in the vision of the company. Getting your employees to become your advocates is also really powerful because most companies don't have brands that are widely recognizable. However, their employees have people that want to create relationships with them. I've always said that most people, and I might mean all people, do not wake up in the morning and think, I wonder what my brand friend or what these brands are going to say today. And that could be on Twitter and that could be on Facebook. So while companies are spending tons of energy making their brand social media, those sites tend to get very, very low engagement. But while evangelists and advocates of companies can tend to build these very strong personal brands that get a lot of engagement online. And that's because people by nature have always preferred engaging with people and learning about brands and building relationships with individuals. That's why personal selling has been successful for so long, and that's why a lot of great account-based marketing and marketing strategies today have come down to how do we make that marketing feel very personalized and very direct. Having engaged employees who are passionate about the brand, who are telling your story, and who are connecting and communicating daily with people across the social web and of course in real life are a great way to help your business achieve its transformation in terms of helping your customers experience the brand in a new way. So my statistic here that I thought was really interesting is that by engaging your employees and getting them involved in the process, they're basically showing that they're producing about 22% more work. And they're actually lowering the turnover rates of companies north of 60%. Now this is really important because of what I mentioned before. The productivity is great, 22% more work, great. But turnover, you've seen the statistics, anywhere from 6 figures up to multiple 6 figures to replace a mid-level manager is exorbitant. And when you're a big company and you're seeing 10 or 20 or 30% of your employees turn over on a yearly basis, that cost is astronomical. But getting your employees involved, making them feel like they're part of the change and the transition going on are very, very important trends to seeing success with your transformation and success in terms of keeping your employees engaged. And then the last one really comes down to a trend that I call technology for people. Today, and sure, there's all kinds of talk about artificial intelligence, chatbots, robots, kiosks, cognitive computing. I can throw out a million more buzzwords, autonomous vehicles, driving down the street. In our dystopian future, we will all be flying around like the Jetsons. We will, simply just sit in our cars and they will take us from point A to point B. But right now, the people and technology still have a very, very symbiotic relationship. They work together very closely. And if you think about it, there's a reason that over 90% of your mobile usage of application comes down to just a handful, usually 5 or 6 of your apps. The reason for this is because the apps that connect us most closely to other people, most closely to our work, and that we enjoy using the most are going to be the apps that we will engage with on a day in and day out basis. When you as a company develop the technology with the people in mind, or you as a company invest in technology with the people in mind, what you're doing is saying that we value your contribution to the organization. We seek to find the technology that helps you to do your job better. This makes me think of when we first put BlackBerries in the hands of our employees. The whole goal was starting this trend of mobility, giving people access to information that they need and taking them out of their offices and out of their desks. So, hey, you can go have that meeting with your customer, but you can still be connected. Now, we've taken that to a whole new extreme with what we can now do, where our handheld device is more powerful than a computer of just a couple of years ago. However, when we start thinking about technology that helps people, you see the adoption rate. You saw the adoption rate of the BlackBerry, and then you saw the adoption rate of the smartphone, and it was because these technologies made people's lives better. Now, this can also be the case with different apps we use. In the collaboration space, we see this quite a bit. We've seen apps off the shelf like Slack become very, very popular for chat and collaboration because it's something that employees are finding and using on their own to be very, very simple and successful. Now, your company may have chosen to deploy a different technology, and it may be a very, very good technology, but there's a reason that your employees are going out and finding their own. Now, this trend, which is called shadow IT, is basically a trend that was developed because employees, their goals are to create additional productivity. I saw a survey actually just this morning that says 81% of employees are going out right now and finding their own apps because their goal is to be more productive at work. And what they're being told is that the apps that we have aren't giving us what we need, so we're going to find our own and use them. And this is great from a transformation standpoint in getting people involved and making them feel like they have power. However, it's also a big problem for the security transformation that has to be part of your digital transformation. So when you develop technology for people, invest in technology for people, and involve your people in the decision making, or at least give them a path to share their ideas for what technology could make their experiences better, you will find that they will be much more likely to adopt the tech that you're proposing to them, or you as a decision maker may find that they have found, used, incorporated new technology that's better than what you're looking at. So it's a great reason to get your people involved in the technology decision-making process, of course, in a way that fits your business and that can be scalable and manageable and hopefully done faster, as I mentioned before. So I'm going to give you one more stat here, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Sam for our little Q&A. But there's about 79%. So I mentioned 81% are out there finding their own. But in just collaboration and file sharing, nearly 80% of employees have gone out, found their own technology that was not sanctioned by IT. Now, again, this is an opportunity for companies to get their employees more involved in this trend and to be more involved in the technology, but it's also a sign that companies and their technology departments are highly disconnected from their employees, and to successfully transform, this connection has to be made. So Sam, I'm going to turn it back over to you briefly before we head into our Q&A.
Yep, thanks a lot, Daniel. Now, I wanted to address a question that we got coming across the chat and elsewhere, Dan, about people wanting some of these details that didn't appear on slides. And what I would, the good news for our audience is that Daniel and I are currently working on a guide, a downloadable PDF guide that contains some of the details that Daniel was speaking to. So just stay tuned for that, that you will have something that you can get your hands on and use in a more detailed way to some of the more minute, the minutia and the more detailed points that Dan was talking about. So
and Sam, I may even throw in a bonus here. We recently published our 7 trends driving the future of digital transformation, a 5-year outlook via Future and Research. So what I'll do is I'll send you that report, and when you send out the new guide we create, you can also send them this report. And this report was selling for about $2,000 in the marketplace, but we've offered it as a tool to some of our listeners in past webinars, so I'll make that available again. A lot of the statistics I gave in today's session came out of that research.
Great, thanks. Yeah, because I think people were looking to maybe take some notes and get some of those points down. So they are coming your way, everyone. And so Dan, I think the things that you were talking about, it gives probably most of us on the webinar a lot to think about and to talk about as we do think about moving our companies toward real digital transformation. And so there were a couple areas that I think we should dive a little deeper into. And I imagine, again, that folks on the call would be looking for more detail in some of those areas. So as a first deeper dive question, and there you already are on the slide, great. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about digital transformation itself, and I know based on our first poll, that was interesting to see that 60% in our poll, people are not only familiar with this concept, but they're actually, it seems, driving toward it or working on it. But I was wondering if you could speak to specific examples of companies and maybe even clients of yours or others that you know firsthand that have really excelled and maybe even pioneered the way for the rest of us in some of the areas that you highlighted, like service, support, marketing, customer success, and the like.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to give 2 examples that are near and dear to my heart. And of course, there's so many companies out there. So, the ones I'm choosing are ones that are very specific to me. And of course, as a consumer, I think this is how we're all seeing digital transformation, is how it impacts us. So anyone that knows me or that follows me in my Facebook or Instagram community knows I'm a huge fan of Dunkin' Donuts or Dunkin' brands, right? And Dunkin' Donuts is not exactly known as the high-tech, high-community coffee company. We all know who that is, right? That's Starbucks. Starbucks has the community. They have the cool, futuristic app, and they've been all about creating a digital transformation experience, going back to the way they, just make internet accessible and have built local little hubs for community and startup building, right? Everybody's at least tried to have one meeting or built, one company inside of a Starbucks. However, Dunkin' kind of had this more dirty brand, I hate to say it, but the shops were never necessarily exciting or clean. They were kind of the second tier for coffee and, of course, donuts, which don't exactly represent health. But for me, I've always been the kind of person that really, really wants a simple coffee experience. I don't want to order in a foreign language. I just want to get a big cup of black coffee to go with me anywhere I want to go. And Dunkin' basically realized that. They did the research, they looked at their customer journey, they looked at what their people wanted, and then they built an app that was ridiculously simple, that you could basically load money on, you could order your drinks and have them ready to be picked up, you could win awards. So you buy so many cups and you get a notice in an email that, hey, you get a free cup of coffee. And what I loved about their transformation is, you know, the brand, like I said, wasn't really one that was caught up with tech. Nobody was thinking about it this way. But what they really did was said, what does our customer want? And then they gave it to us. So now I've probably increased my spending on a day in and day out basis at Dunkin' Donut by 2 and 3 times, because they basically gave me an app on my phone that where I don't have to worry about having cash on me or even a wallet on me, where I can go straight from the gym in my gym gear. I can pull up to the window, I scan a little barcode, I get coffee, and then every 4th or 5th time I get a cup, I get an email that says, hey, we appreciate your loyalty. Here's another cup for free. So it's a very simple example, but they really were listening to what their customer wanted, and they said, we're not going to try to be Starbucks. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to keep it focused on our customer, and we're going to build a great app for people who want a simple cup of coffee on the go. So that's a good, retail example, Sam. And, one other example that's near and dear to my heart was we mentioned that I'm a huge soccer fan, and I have 2 daughters that play soccer, and so I've moved from going to a local soccer retailer to buying most of my stuff at soccer.com. And soccer.com used to have probably one of the worst websites for e-commerce on the planet. But what they've really done over the last about 2 years was create a mobile and omni-channel integrated experience with email, desktop, mobile that really created a wonderful end-to-end experience. And this was really defined for me by one time when I had put a pair of shoes for my daughter into my shopping cart when I was at dinner, and I forgot to complete the purchase. And this was like on a Wednesday, and her first tournament was on Saturday. And the next day, I got an email from them telling me, hey, you left your, you abandoned your cart. Do you still want these? P.S. If you order today, here's a free overnight or next day shipping code. And so the way they'd integrated that experience to basically come back to me and say, hey, we see you shopping on your mobile, you didn't finish, here's an email, and here's something personal to drive you back. And by the way, they basically were reading my mind because they remembered that I needed those shoes by the weekend. They didn't even know that, except somehow, unless I might have searched something. And they got some sort of retargeting, but I got that email. I was able to get the shoes overnight, and they were there the day before I needed them. And this was all in a matter of 48 hours. It connected me on mobile. It connected me on my desktop. It connected me to my email. And the experience, that was shipping right to my door. It was just a tremendous experience. And like I said, what they really had in mind was the customer. I mean, there's nothing about a soccer commerce website that really makes you think futuristic technology. But what they're thinking about is what does our customer want and need, and how can we deliver it to them?
Great examples. I love the Dunkin' Donuts example, as it can sound a little intimidating when you talk about saying, oh yeah, it has to be simple but personal and mobile, and that can sound like, wow, that's a lot to pull off. But when the Dunkin' Donuts example is fantastic, of making it's just simple and it's personal, it's mobile, and that really is what companies can drive toward and what customers are looking for. So it's fantastic. So let's go into a second deeper dive question. And your statistic about 80% of companies believing they're differentiated from competitors, when in fact only a rather small percentage of their customers perceive them that way. That stat reminded me of what we see with some of our new customers, particularly at Clicktools, before they launch a feedback or a survey program, where basically they don't know what customers really think, and whether good or bad, and they find out that internal views and internal anecdotal stories and all that stuff, that they don't really tell the whole story. Or in the case of your stat, it's human nature, they paint themselves a rosier picture than what's really true about what customers are really experiencing. So my question is, how have you seen companies develop reality-based, and keyword being reality-based, data and baselines, etc., about what customers think and how they actually stack up against competitors?
That's a great question, Sam. We recently did a report, which will be out soon, via Futurum about data-driven leadership and kind of the end of the era of gut and intuition. And I think the reason stats like this come to be is because the adoption of data analytics and best practices for customer feedback are really, really delayed. And although the pundits, including people like myself, love to talk about what's possible, a lot of companies are struggling to really get started in successfully getting feedback from their customers. So either A, they're using a very, very limited, statistically irrelevant subset of information to decide whether or not they're differentiated, right? Who do executives and salespeople ask for feedback? They ask their best customers. So that might represent, in any Pareto-driven world, an 80-20 rule. They're going to ask their 20% of their customers, who are their 80% of revenue, for the feedback about, well, are we good, are we different? Who do companies almost never ask? Are the customers that are unhappy, the customers that have had a bad experience, the customers that have left, or even just the customers that are small and maybe not priorities on a day-to-day basis. So I think one of the biggest opportunities to solve this problem and avoid being mistakenly seeing themselves as competitively different is asking. And of course, I think this is a great opportunity, Sam, for you guys or for a company like Clicktools to basically talk about what you do, because the short is it's got to be set up in a format that's easy to collect the data. And I think this is one of the reasons companies don't use data. I think one is they're scared, they don't know where to start, and two is they don't know how to make it simple enough. So once they even do start, it's how do we make it simple? And my recommendation is going back to what I said about you're having your questions, is do it one thing at a time. Stop thinking big data and start thinking little data. What is one data point that could help you become more successful? If your goal is reducing attrition, what questions can you ask your customers today that could help you get a better sense of why they're staying, why they're leaving, what they're happy about, and what they're not, so that you can make changes in your business strategy and in your communication strategy to try to keep them there.
Yeah, and Dan, part of your answer reminds me of something that we've been talking about quite a bit at Clicktools this year, which is not being afraid to look at that quote-unquote negative feedback, not to be scared to really get past the anecdotal and to know even if it's constructive criticism, as it were, but to be able to wrap your arms around all different data points, both on the positive side of the spectrum and the negative. And as another little plug, actually, in addition to the guide that you and I are working on this material, folks on the webinar, we are putting out a guide in the next week or so called How to Handle Your Haters. And this is based on a couple of blog posts that I wrote this year. And it's a guide on what are best practices and methodologies for handling that negative feedback, and that it's really some of the most valuable input that you're going to get from your customers. And with that, Dan, let's jump, unless you have further comments, let's jump to our third and final deeper dive question. And man, this one is a doozy. So, back on the subject of employee engagement, which, as I said, this is a large can of worms in itself, and we could easily spend an entire webinar just on this subject and what we already know. And certainly for our team here at Badgeville, I mean, we already know a lot about how people are digitally motivated through things like gamification, natural healthy competition, emotion, some of the things that you already mentioned. And I've certainly seen through the course of this year, employee engagement has come to the front of mind for so many thought leaders. It's gotten a ton of ink, to use an old-fashioned term. So where do you weigh in on this discussion, Dan? Do you think employee engagement has moved actually in front of customer engagement, or is it more like you need the former to achieve the latter? Where do you weigh in on where employee engagement fits into the bigger picture?
Well, I think the problem is a lot of companies get employee engagement and customer experience a little bit wrong, and the way I really like to say it is that your employees are your first customers. And this isn't an idea that's unique to me. Great CEOs like Richard Branson have said similar things, but that basically people first means really putting the people inside the company first. And everybody knows when they've walked into a restaurant or into a retail store and employees aren't happy, you just get that feeling from them, right? And it's like, I hate my job, I hate this company, and boy does that, just feel awful when you're a customer and you go into that kind of establishment. And that's because in a lot of companies, they just don't put the people first. So when I say put the people first, I really do think build everything around customer experience, but understand that your employee is your first customer. And they're also a great opportunity to gain feedback. So when you're building your methodology for getting customer feedback, you should really think about how to get feedback from your employees as well.
Great, and thank you for that last little bit of insight. And I'm kind of keeping my eye on the clock here, and we should go ahead and jump to our open Q&A. And before we do that, I think we have another poll that we can go ahead and launch. So, oh, sorry, Daniel, did you have
No, Sam, I was just going to say, while they're doing this poll, I did want to mention one thing because I kind of answered your question directly and I didn't necessarily answer the deep dive question. But I did want to point really quickly that gamification can be accomplished in companies of all shapes and sizes. And I think a lot of times people think that gamification is designed for big companies with large sales forces and departments. Thanks to technology and tools, really it can happen anywhere. And one of the examples I give is, my father's been in the trucking industry forever, but let's just say for about 40 years, and he runs a larger trucking company. Let's say there's about 100 drivers on the road any given day in that company. And he actually started a drivers league, a gamification model, basically using fantasy football as the business model, where he put together teams of drivers, and the goal was to increase safety, increase on-time delivery, and increase camaraderie among the team. And over the course of about 18 months, they tracked all kinds of statistics. They rewarded the teams and then the company employees and drivers as a whole for meeting certain benchmarks. And then, of course, the winners got even above and beyond additional income and benefits. And it was something done very simply. But it was very, very inspiring and motivating, and it was done in an industry that couldn't be less on the forefront of technology. And that's why I really think it's important to realize that employee engagement and workplace gamification isn't a future tech thing. It's really a today tech thing, and it's something that tools are out there and available to help companies do it right now. But even if you're a company with 10, 20, or 30 employees, there is the possibility of leveraging this to get more results and more productivity from the people you have while making them feel more connected to their workplace.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point, Dan, that I'm glad you addressed. Like, for example, at Badgeville, we talk about adding gamification to the solutions that people are already using. So gamification doesn't need to be some separate, intimidating technology that's a separate project. It's this big beast of a IT project. What we talk about is adding a gamification layer to the solutions your teams already use, and that's what we do at Badgeville, is build that in, whether we're talking about a CRM system or many, many other systems that we build gamification into. But it can be for small teams, and it doesn't need to be another system that people need to learn, because it's woven into, for example, they're already in Salesforce. Well, let's gamify Salesforce. So that's kind of an important point. Now, let's go ahead. I've got everyone hopefully answered the poll, and we should be able to see results come in from that. Okay, yes. Oh, great. So interesting. That's good to see. So 58% of organizations on this webinar do value employee engagement as high as customer engagement, and that seems to line up really well with what we're seeing kind of out in the blogosphere and elsewhere. Dan, does that match up with what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I think that it's a two steps, Sam. It's first people who are acknowledging it, and then it's people who are executing it. I think the acknowledgement of the employee, the engaged employee, has become much higher. As you mentioned, it's gotten more ink, more attention, more thought leadership, partially just because there's more content than ever before being created. But I also think it's sort of, you still see about 42% that are saying no, which basically means that they're putting the customer ahead of the employee. And I think that's what leads to high turnover rates and disconnected experiences. So I think the two have to be aligned, or else the customer experience will never be optimized.
Yeah, agree with that. That certainly it's that you really have to have the engaged employees in order to have engaged customers, and it's what you were talking about when you walk into certain establishments or what have you, and you can just kind of feel that negative vibe that you know, people don't really want to be there, and that's certainly no way to get customers you know, more loyal and more engaged. So, okay, now with a definite eye on time, I'm going to ask a couple questions from the audience, and we've got a few teed up already. Okay, here we go. I'm going to read this.
We'll call it the speed round. I'll go quick.
Yeah, here's the speed round. This is like, yeah, your speed dating segment of today's webinar. Okay, first question. Does Daniel recommend, quote unquote, starting small with digital transformation? Should we focus on one area like revenue or CSAT, or try to tackle multiple business objectives at once?
Well, I think that, you know, what I said is that oftentimes companies can't eat the elephant in one sitting, right? So you say, how do you eat the elephant a bite at a time? Well, digital transformation, there is no end. It's a process that continues in perpetuity. So what I always recommend for most businesses is, yes, start with those questions you have. Focus on one area that's key to your business. Maybe it's two areas. And build a methodology for actually accomplishing it. So if you say we want to improve customer sat by 10%, then you start to look at that's really the digital transformation goal. You know, and then you start to build that methodology that's underpinning that transformation activity. Now, again, it starts with understanding how do you start, how do you evaluate technology, how do you implement it, how do you analyze its success, and then what you're doing is basically creating a repeatable, scalable model for transforming other areas of your business later on.
Great, okay, and then, you know, that's actually not a bad segue into another question, which is talking about the trend, I'm going to just read it to you. In regard to the trend around non-IT sanctioned collaboration technologies, is it a recommended practice to actually ban or block certain apps? Or should companies have some flexibility with letting employees choose their preferred platforms?
Yeah, this is a really hard one because, you know, if it's BYOD and the employees are bringing their own devices, it's really hard to block and sanction what they can and cannot use. There's mobile device management tools that can be put on phones. There can be extra layers of security for work applications. If it is a company-provided phone, you can potentially block them on that device, but you can't really stop them from going on a different device and then using the app and even using it for a work purpose. So while yes, you can certainly try to create some IT-centric control, what's really happening is the control has been moving outside of the IT department and inside to the line of businesses, but it has to be done with cooperation of the IT department. I think what happens is when employees and their managers dictate new use cases, it creates a protectionism inside of the CIO suite. They get very defensive and protective and resistant to these new applications, whereas you know, when you work together and you basically say this is why we need it, and you have a process for the approval of, you know, outside applications to be used on a day-to-day basis within the workplace, you can help create adoption, help engage employees, help increase productivity, all while still managing and monitoring the implications on security.
Great, great, and that's such a larger discussion. I have so many things that I want to comment on about that, but I think let me quickly ask you a final question, and then we're going to need to wrap up because we're coming close to the top of the hour here. So quickly, going back to your stat about a large percentage of business projects failing because of adoption issues, the question is, do these failures happen more in certain areas or departments? Are some functional areas better or worse at driving tech adoption?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the study where that data came from didn't actually analyze it down to the department levels. I mean, I think just like everything else, I do believe that most tech projects don't live inside of a single department. So when they talk about employee adoption being one of the key drivers of failure, it happens because an IT project manager is assigned to roll out a new CRM solution to the sales department. Well, that IT project manager doesn't have a lot of authority, so if the sales VP is not being collaborative and cooperative with that IT project manager, it certainly isn't going to be cooperative as you go downstream into regional directors and account managers and support professionals. So having project plans that are thorough, and then obviously having the vision and the buy-in is so important. And it sounds a little cliche, and I know it sounds a little cliche, but a lot of times what happens is, like I said, employees don't understand why. This makes me think back to the first expense management software that I was given and told to use. And basically I went from, hey, send us an envelope with a pile full of receipts and a quick Excel spreadsheet that I could do in 30 minutes to a digital process that added 1 or 2 hours of time for me to get reimbursed for expenses. This is a huge deal for salespeople, but adding that time was so painful. And I didn't understand why it was so important and how many other people's time was involved in organizing that expense report that I put in, that it just didn't make me want to help. And so these are the kind of things where if people understand the full 360-degree view of why this technology is going to help the organization, help your coworkers, help your employees, help the company better manage its compliance and governance, and of course ultimately at some point maybe even help that employee, you're a lot more likely to get the adoption.
Right. Well, hey, that's a perfect place to end up, because we're right back at people first. And it's really people are what is driving the successful digital transformation. So it is exactly an hour into today's session, and thank you for filling that time, Dan. And I know there's so many areas that we could continue to dive deeper into, and I hope we do in the future. In the meantime, thanks everyone for joining us today. We really would look forward to hearing from you. If you want to reach out either on clicktools.com or badgeville.com, there's various contact methods there, or hit us up on Twitter or Facebook. We are simply at Clicktools on Twitter and at Badgeville on Twitter. We're easily found on Facebook, LinkedIn, and elsewhere as well, and we really always do welcome your comments and your questions. And a final reminder to look for the guides that Dan and I talked about. We'll be sending out some more detailed information in downloadable format, and then we are also, of course, sending out a recording of this for those of you who joined us late or who want to share with a colleague or review. So thank you again, and Dan, thanks so much for being with us today. Have a great week, everybody.
It's my pleasure.